Hey, Business Warriors, Professor E here with another VLR in our series. We're going to start talking about VLR-4, and we're going to get into demanding ethical and social responsibility behaviors. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is ethics. What is ethics when we say ethics? Well, we start to talk about ethics and we get into it's basically the standard of moral behavior that is accepted by society, okay? So basically it's right versus wrong. Now, we often would say, well, that's easy, Professor E. I know the difference between right and wrong, and we should just call it a day, right? We're done with this VLR. But really, when you think about it, ethics can be very challenging, okay? Because we start looking at what is right and what is wrong, right? So we start looking at different moral values. We know that integrity is right. We know the respect for human life is very good. That's right. We have some self-control, being honest, courageous, things like that. And then we also know that cheating would be wrong. We know that cruelty is wrong, things like that, okay? What's interesting about ethics, though, is that we start talking about different value systems, how people perceive ethics, and that's kind of what we want to get into today when we start to say, hey, what is really right versus wrong? I throw up here one of my favorite stories is when I was doing my master's program at GW, we actually had, when we had ethics day and marketing and stuff like that, they would actually bring in experts from the local community. So we had a lawyer come in from one of the local law firms, and he was talking about business ethics and things like that. And he went up to the board, and when he went up to the board, he drew this. He said, well, he says, us lawyers, he says, we're very important people and stuff like that. He says, there's right and there's wrong. And he drew it up here and he goes, there's right and there's wrong. He says, us lawyers, we like to be in the gray area right here. This is kind of where we operate. You never know what is right and what is wrong and stuff like that. And I was a student. I was sitting kind of, midway back. And I remember looking at this and I said, oh, and I raised my hand. I said, can I come up and add to that diagram you drew? And he looked at me kind of funny. And he said, sure, come on up. And so I came up to him. He's standing over there. I'm standing here. So let me get this straight. I said, you lawyers, I said, there's right and wrong. I said, and then there's the gray area where you guys operate. Is that correct? He goes, uh-huh. And I took his pen and I drew and I went like this. I said, this is where you guys operate, correct? He said, yeah, right. I said, so, and I took his pen and I do this. I go, this is where you guys operate. And I started drawing dollar signs in there and he started laughing. He goes, that is fantastic. I'm going to have to use that. And I said, of course, go ahead. So this is where lawyers like to operate. They love ethics because they have to determine or try to argue what was right, what was wrong. Okay, so this is how they make their money. They like the gray area, though. Remember that, okay? Factors affecting the ethical behavior. This is really where we start to kind of dig deep and go, okay, what is ethics and how does it impact us as people, as businesses, and things like that. As an individual factor, it may be your personal values, right? It could be your knowledge of the issue, whether you had enough knowledge to make the right decision or not, right? And your personal goals, right? So we look at that. We look at our social factors. This one's big if you really think about it because we start looking at your cultural norms, right? We start looking at what your others think, your significant others, things like that. And then obviously we look at opportunity. I'm sure we've all been there in some way, function, or form where an opportunity arose and you sat there and went, oh, I don't know. If I do this, it could be wrong, right? But I could get a personal gain from it, okay? That's an ethical situation where you have to determine whether or not it's right or wrong. One of the best stories I like to tell when I'm in class and stuff like that is that, back in my Army days, when I was a second lieutenant in a platoon, an infantry platoon, I had about 34 men that I trained. And they came from all walks of life. And I remember I used to have two soldiers that were from the south side of Chicago. Now, I often joke that I'm from the south side of Chicago, but actually I lived about 2.5 hours south of Chicago, right in the middle of the state of Illinois. I am a farm boy raised, country boy in the middle of the heart of the state of Illinois. These two were actually from the south side of Chicago. To give you a reference of what the south side of Chicago is like, it's very survival of the fittest. And I will tell you that when I was in 6th grade or around 12 years old, we actually took our first trip to Chicago. And when we went to Chicago, of course, when we get off the bus, it's a bunch of 12-year-olds going like this. Wow, this is incredible, right? And it was a great trip, very memorable. I do remember at one point, though, we got back on the bus and we were heading somewhere else. I can't remember where it was. And the bus driver accidentally took one of the exits. He took a wrong exit. And so when he took the exit, we came down and then he realized that we were probably wrong. We had three buses behind him and he stopped. And when he stopped, he opened the door and then the teachers got off and so did all these 12-year-old sixth graders, right? All from the farmlands of the middle of the state of Illinois, right? We were starting to walk around on the sidewalks when two cop cars came rolling up on us with their lights on and they were like going hard at us and they stopped and they didn't even get out of the car. They got on their speaker and said, "You are in a very bad part of the neighborhood and you need to get back on that bus immediately." And all the teachers started scurrying and getting everybody back onto the bus. So that's how, South Side, you got to be careful where you end up. It can be very dangerous kind of thing. So you take that concept, right? And then you fast forward to where I had two soldiers from that area, were their values different than mine? Absolutely, right? Were they, cultural norms? Were their social values different? Yeah, because they were raised a little differently than mine. And then the reason I say that is because there were times in the Army where we used to do mafia deals, right? If I needed some sort of resource from another unit, I would go over and do a mafia deal. Hey, can I exchange, can I get some ammunition from you so we can go down range and train, right? And I'll give you some, mortar pool stuff with your vehicles and stuff like that. We would do trades like that all the time. At one point, we were trying to actually do some training downrange, and I was trying to work a mafia deal, and I was having trouble getting some ammunition and things like that. And I showed up one morning, and here's a whole pallet full of ammunition. And I'm thinking to myself, where did this come from? And I went to my guys, and my two Southside guys go, "Sir, we got the ammunition, so we can go train." And I said, "How did you get that?" And they said, "Don't worry about it, sir." I'm like, "Oh, wait, time out. I need to worry about it because if it comes back, I'm the one in trouble." So it turned out it was okay. They kind of did deals like I was doing, but at the time, I had to start thinking. I had to start training them and say, "Look, I respect where you come from. I respect that you have different social factors. I respect that you have different cultural norms." But the IC for them, they would not even think twice about it. They'd be like, "Absolutely, that's where I might thought it was wrong. They might go, ain't nothing wrong with that. We can totally get away with it, right?" So everyone has different viewpoints when it comes to ethics. I slowly trained them to say, "Hey, look, guys, I respect where you came from, but I really want you to start thinking more this way because eventually you're not going to be in the Army. You're going to go out. You're going to have this wonderful resume, and you wanted to build upon that." So it took some time to kind of convince them of this stuff. But again, whenever they think my personal values, no, that sounds great to me. Okay, so you have to be careful of that. A great example here, we have paying the price, some examples here of poor ethics, but we have Enron many years ago, I think early 2000s. One of the Enron was known for, they were an energy company that was basically lying to their investors. The stock price was going through the roof at like 180, $200 a share. And then finally a whistleblower came in and told basically that they were lying about their numbers. And so the FBI came rolling in. Enron stock went to zero. They went out of business, and what's really sad is that 10,000 employees lost their jobs. But not only did they lose their job, but they had invested their own money inside their retirement funds in Enron. They were investing in their own company because it was doing so well. Well, now all their retirement funds went to zero too. So very sad state, very sad story. But Enron, one of the executives is serving over 24 years for accounting fraud because they were the executives that were in charge of giving those false numbers. Arthur Andersen, which no longer exists anymore, they were actually the accounting firm that was doing the numbers for them. So it was kind of an under-the-table handshake of, "Hey, you'll take care of us with the numbers and we'll give you some more contracts and stuff like that." And they bought into it. Tampering with witnesses, the company was dissolved. About 28,000 people lost their jobs, all based on an ethical situation. Tyco International, two executives stole $600 million from the company and are scheduled to be released from prison in 2030. Adelphia Communications, two executives were convicted of conspiracy, bank, and security fraud and given sentences of 15 to 20 years. And WorldCom, the CEO was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and false filings and sentenced to 25 years. So don't tell me ethics isn't as important, okay? It's very important. Here's a debate. Can it be taught or yes or no? And, I'm not going to, I know it's kind of an eye chart here, but the idea is that in some camps, they say, absolutely, you can go to school. I can put you through training. I can put you through scenarios that show you what is right and wrong so that when you get out into the real world and encounter these scenarios, you can say, I've already participated in something like this, so I have a general idea of how to react to this kind of situation. And some say no. Some say no. You were born into it, bred into it. You were raised a certain way. Those are the values that you have, and therefore I can't retrain you. So there's very two different schools of thought. I personally think, I told you, I took my South Side of the Chicago guys and I did train them, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't like we sat down for 10 minutes. I'm like, you need to stop right now. This is the way I want you to think. Okay. It had to be, I have to take you through scenarios. I have to make you understand that it's not your fault that you have a certain value system. I respect your value system, but I need you to kind of convert your value system to what society expects, because I want you to be successful in life. So, fortunately they came around. Not everybody does. Again, it comes back to survival instincts. If that's your thing and you get across a situation, you may go into survivor mode going, hey, I know it's right. And even though society may not, but that it's not that you're wrong. It's just that because that's all you know, but society looks at it differently. So definitely two different schools of thought when it comes to this stuff. I will say too, as another example, I went to the academy, is that when we were cadets, they did this to us all the time. After lunch, we would have to go downstairs and into the basement, and we'd have to run scenarios. And I'll never forget, one of the major scenarios they ran one time was, hey, you're in, Atlanta, and you're at the Marriott, and you have 15 guys, and of course it's $150 a night. And what do you do? Do you pile 10 guys into one room so you only have to pay $15 a piece, or do you actually do the right thing and put 4 guys to a room and get so many rooms? And so we would go through those scenarios, and I remember at the time going, this is dumb, right? Why would I? Of course not. Blah blah blah. We go through the scenarios. Fast forward, I graduate, right? I'm out there in the real world. I'm out there training. We end up in Atlanta one weekend with about 15 guys. We end up at the Embassy Suites, right? $150 a night. And we're all sitting there at the counter going, we don't have a lot of money. And someone's like, why don't we just pack everybody into one room? I'm like, didn't we go through the scenario? And sure enough, there it was, real world right in front of us. So we did the right thing. We split up into different rooms. But that's my point, is that sometimes you get into a scenario and you go, oh, maybe we should do that. But because I had been kind of trained, or I had been exposed to a certain ethical dilemma, I kind of knew how to treat it. And again, it goes back to integrity and stuff like that. So I even say it on my syllabus that integrity is one of the most important commodities you can have in life. Is if you lose your integrity with somebody or an organization or with a person or people, you'll never get it back. Once you lose your integrity, it's gone. So we really want to think about these things. Ethics and you. Plagiarism from internet materials is the most common form of cheating in school. So raise the hands who plagiarizes. I'm just kidding. Don't tell me that, okay? So no, but again, the studies prove that if you do plagiarize in school, then you're going to think that's okay. And then when you get out into the real world, you may plagiarize something there, and then again, it could be a snowball effect. So, study's fine. If you do it in school, you're going to do it in the real world. So again, start now. It's not right. If you get caught, that you're going to get hammered. So, there's rules involved there. So think about that. Facing an ethical dilemma. So a couple questions you can ask yourself is it legal? Obviously, if it's not legal, it's probably not ethical. Okay, so stop right there. Okay, so is it balanced? Does it work within your personal life and stuff like that? How will it make you feel about yourself, right? That's a loaded question, because my South Side of Chicago guys would say, I feel great. I have no problem with that. So it really depends on the personality, the background, how you were raised and stuff like that. So, you got to think about these things. I actually entered this one in. I think this is pretty good. This is called the Texas Instrument. This is what they have at Texas Instrument as one of their policies to consider when it comes to ethical situations. Again, number one question, is it legal? If it's not legal, stop right there. It's probably not ethical, okay? This one's kind of a loaded one, right? Does it comply with our values? Well, again, South Side of Chicago guys be like, absolutely, no problem. Okay, so it depends on the situation and the person and stuff like that. If you do it, will you feel bad? My South Side of Chicago guys wouldn't feel bad. So again, it depends on the person and stuff like that. This one's interesting though. How will it look in the newspaper? That's a good question to ask yourself. Saying, if someone finds out about what I just did and it gets put on social media, let's say, or in the newspaper, it says newspaper here, but let's say it gets posted on social media what you did. Will you be okay with that? if you get a tingly feeling up your neck when you think about that and you're like, I don't know, it might be an ethical situation then. It says here, if you know it's wrong, don't do it. If you're not sure, ask your manager, ask your leadership, is it okay for us to do this? And they'll tell you, right? No, we can't do that. Or maybe we can, but we need to do it from a different angle, possibly. Maybe they'll give you a better approach to the situation. If you don't get an answer, keep asking until you do. And then my favorite is, will it come back and bite me in my fourth point of contact? What does that mean? Well, when I was in the Army and we jumped out of airplanes, that's an airborne term, right? So you jump out of airplanes, the first thing that should hit the ground is your feet, and then you're going to hit your thighs and your knees, and then your thigh bone, and then the fourth point is going to be your rear end. Okay, so you should fall like a sack of potatoes. That's the idea. Fall like a sack of potatoes. Okay, but I always say, will it come back and bite me in my fourth point of contact or my rear end? Okay, if you think it will, don't do it. And then I did say this is Texas Instruments policy, but I say, hey, don't just consider it Texas Instrument, but look for it as Me Incorporated. This is probably the first time I've introduced this concept, but I often think every one of you are running a business right now. It's called Me Incorporated. Okay, if you're working right now, you have money coming in and you're paying your bills and stuff like that. It's the same concept as a business, right? So you are Me Incorporated. Eventually, you're going to market yourself to get a better job, a better career, and stuff like that. It's Me Incorporated. Okay, so you're running a business called Me Incorporated. Why not add in this little into your kit bag, the ethics list right here? So put it to your kit bag in Me Incorporated. Talking about ethical situations, well, let's talk about YouTube. Okay, so I'm sure we all do YouTube. This is where I'm posting a lot of my VLRs. I have my own channel now. Okay, every minute people upload 10 hours of video to YouTube. Not all of it is user-generated content, though. Okay, Viacom a few years back sued YouTube for $1 billion. Okay, for allowing episodes of its popular shows on the site. So consumers were recording, shows, TV shows, and then uploading it on YouTube for everyone else to watch. Okay, Viacom holds YouTube responsible for it. Okay, for carrying the illegal content rather than the individuals that uploaded it. Okay, the question is YouTube wrong or is the individual wrong? Should Viacom go after YouTube or should they go after each individual? Well, obviously Viacom's not going to go after each individual. They're gonna hold the blame to the organization that actually holds the videos, right? And it's very interesting in that as of today, whenever you upload a video now to YouTube, it takes however long to upload, but afterwards it goes through a processing format. It'll sit there and look like it's processing. And what's happening is that YouTube has now hired individuals to actually go through your video very quickly to make sure you're not infringing on any copyrights. You're not uploading a video of a TV show or something like that. So that's what that processing is doing. When people upload their video, it's processing to make sure now that it's not infringing on anybody's copyrights. I've actually put things up there, and I've embedded videos. You'll see down the road in some VLRs, I embed a video just to kind of show you. And one time it came back and said that I was borderline copyright infringement. I wasn't trying to, but they said that, hey, this isn't going to be a strike against you, but just a warning that, hey, you might have been really close to the edge there. So they really do pay attention to that now because they got sued, right? They're reactive. Here's another one for you. So what's this, right? It's called a boom box. This is what I had in the 80s. This is I used to carry that on my shoulder, right? This is my iPod or my iPhone with all my music on it back in the 80s. It was about this big, and I carried it on my shoulder and stuff like that. Okay. What's interesting about that is that my boombox came with two of these. And then what are these? These are cassette players. So back then we had cassette players, right? So you pop in a cassette, hit play, listen to your music. All right. What's very interesting about that is, though, there was two of them there. Why? Because I could go to a Kmart at the time and I could buy a package of 3 called Memorex. They were blank tapes. So basically what was happening is I could put a blank tape in here. I could listen to the radio. And as the songs came on, this was actually a skill set, but you'd listen to the DJ if you knew a song was coming on. And then as soon as you heard the song, you're like, okay, I hear the music coming, but he would still be talking. As soon as he stopped talking, you'd hit record and play, and you'd try to make mixed tapes. That's how we did it in the 80s. We didn't have this Spotify or anything like that. We had to make our own mixtapes, all right? In addition to that, I could also, if somebody bought the cassette for an actual album, I could borrow it from them. I could put it in here, put my blank tape in here, hit play, hit record, and then I could dub it and have my own official album of whatever that band was. So the question I ask is, was I being unethical? And a lot of you out there are going, absolutely, they should have thrown you in jail, Professor E. This is ridiculous, right? But I was a 12-year-old, right? So the idea is that, my point is, though, it only became unethical when the music artists came out and go, I'm not making money off of this because they're stealing my content. They're recording it and dubbing it. So when they made a big issue out of it, it then became unethical. So it's interesting to show how the evolution of ethics kind of come about too, because I didn't know any better. I actually went and bought the stuff, and they actually gave us the product and the ability to do it. Now you don't do that these days, okay? So very interesting how ethics has evolved over time when it starts to come to money and stuff like that. Ethics starts at the top. Trust between workers and managers must be based on fairness, honesty, openness, and moral integrity, okay? Leadership can instill corporate values to the employees, all right? So the bottom line is, and we haven't got into leadership yet. We get into that down the road in a couple other VLRs. But the idea is that, if I'm coming across to my soldiers as an example, or my employees, and I'm kind of treating myself as in an unethical manner, like, that's no big deal, we can do that. They're going to take that on, all right? So I have to be, as a leader, I have to be able to show that I am a leader and that I have high ethical standards. If I don't, then my followers are going to be the same way, okay? If I do, then they're going to follow me in that same regards too. So leadership can do it. And again, it comes down, you can do some training and stuff like that. I have to do ethical training once a year. I have to go through the process, just like many of you guys out there when you're working. I'm sure there's some sort of ethical training you have to go through. It happens all the time. Factors that influence managerial ethics. So we look at a couple of different factors, but what's interesting is that at an individual level, and I already talked about this, but what's your personal values? How are you raised, right? So again, if I was raised a certain way, and I'm kind of like the Richie Cunningham, back in the cornfields of Illinois kind of thing, that's how I was raised, and you compare me to someone from the South Side, who's wrong? Well, neither one of us are wrong, in my opinion, okay? Society will probably dictate that the South Side person making a decision might be wrong because that's how society looks at it. But we have to look at how is he raised, how is she raised, and then maybe try to convert them. Now, it goes back to, can they be retrained or not, right? It depends. I personally think it depends on leadership, right? I told you I went through that process with my guys. If you give them enough leadership and enough respect and kind of show them why you're doing something, you can usually have a little more success in trying to get them to do the right thing. So top level management philosophies, right? So organizational philosophies is saying this is how we do business ethically, then everyone's going to subscribe to that ethical behavior. Environment, competition, that always kind of causes people to possibly be unethical, especially if it's happening very fast, right? So we have to be careful of that. The economic conditions, is this going to make me money, make the organization money? We have to think about that. Do we still want to do the right thing? Some guidelines in making those ethical decisions. Well, first thing you want to do is be a good listener, right? That's part of being a good leader, right? So we want to recognize if a problem comes up, we want to recognize the problem, right? What's the problem or opportunity? Be sure you understand everybody involved, okay? Identify the ethical issues. So we're going to examine how others are affected by the situation, right? So here's a situation that happened. This is how this person reacted to it. How is everyone impacted around them for that? We have to understand it, okay? And we want to understand the viewpoints of those involved. We want to understand both sides of the story, basically. So you want to kind of step back and go, okay, take a deep breath, and let's figure out who's impacted, what's their viewpoint, how is this laid out, and what actually happened. We want to create and analyze options on how we're going to solve this problem, right? Put aside strong feelings, right? Come up with alternatives, assess which options are the best result. Again, we haven't really talked about this yet, but when we get into planning and organizing and stuff like that, we're going to sit down and determine, hey, there's 3 courses of action, then we have to determine the best course of action. It's the same concept. the same concept here. We're going to create and analyze our options and then decide what's the best course of action here. Identify the best option from your viewpoint, okay, from the leadership point of view. We're going to consider the options and test it against the criteria such as respect, understanding, caring, fairness, honesty, and openness. We want to make sure that whatever our choice is as a leader, whichever course of action we want to take, that it's going to properly impact everybody in a positive manner, okay? Then we're going to explain our decision, right? Resolve any differences. And then if we have to, we may have to involve arbitration, maybe an additional proposal. We have to do some sort of contract or something like that so that we can document what's going on. We get into some terms and start looking at the ethical terms out there, ethical codes. Increasing number of companies have adopted written codes of ethics. A compliance-based ethics codes is basically emphasizes preventing unlawful behavior within the organization. You can have an integrity-based ethics code, basically define the organization's guiding values within the organization. This is how we want to do business. This is how we want you to do business. We don't expect you to do this. Make sure we do the right things within the organization so that we come across well with our customers and our stakeholders. Remember that term. We talked about that in the previous VLR, okay? I will tell you I have both of these in my business. I have them written up in my business. And then whenever I'm audited, they always check out and make sure I have these. I have a 5-page ethics document written up so that I can share it with my clients. I can share it with my suppliers. I can share it with whoever wants to see it. How to improve America's business ethics? Well, this is what I really want you to know. There's different ways to do this. First thing you have to do is top management must adopt an unconditional support and explicit code of ethics, okay? So again, I told you I have one in my company. I have it written up, okay? So anybody who ends up working for me, I would definitely give that to them. And then I have to have them sign it to say that, hey, you've reviewed it and you understand how that we comply within our business, okay? Employees must understand, there you go. Employees must understand that senior management expects all employees to act ethically. And again, if you're out there and you're working and you've gone through some sort of ethics training, I would probably presume that you had to sign something saying that you went through the training. A lot of times it's twofold. One is that they can record that you have been there. And two is that if you actually do screw up down the road, they can say they signed off knowing that this is what we did. Okay, so they'll definitely want to make sure that you understand. Managers and others must be trained. Okay, so we're going to be trained on the ethics and consider the ethical implications of all business decisions. So it could come down to scenarios again, right? So maybe go through different business scenarios and say, hey, this is what we've seen in the past. This is what they did. This is what was wrong. And this is how we want to do it correctly if it ever comes across to us again, okay? Step number 4. You're going to set up a whistleblower program, right? So an ethics office must be set up where employees can communicate anonymously, okay? What do we call this? Go ahead, wait for it. Snitches, right. Snitches, right. That's what we call them, snitches, right. It's a whistleblower program, though, okay? An anonymous way to tell others that something is wrong, okay? I mean, we have to have those in place, right? The Enron example I gave you, the whole reason they went down is because someone inside whistleblowed, right? And they did it anonymously. I don't even know if today they know who the whistleblower was, right? We've heard things in today's world, if something came up, who's the whistleblower? They want to try to find that, and they try to hide that person saying, hey, no, this is part of the program. It's anonymous, okay? So we want to involve our outsiders, such as suppliers, things like that, about our ethical procedures and policies that are in place. And then probably the most important is step number 6, is that you must enforce the code of ethics in a timely manner. So if someone within the organization does something that is not ethical, you can't wait 6 months. You can't come back and go, hey, Johnny, we're now going to go after you for that ethical dilemma that you did. And he's going to look at you and what are you talking about, right? That was so 6 months ago, right? You have to be on top of it right away. Make sure if you have an HR department, they're coming in to analyze and everything and making sure that Johnny knows what he did wrong, okay? You got to do it in a timely manner. Otherwise, you will not be effective, okay? 6 steps, definitely want you to know those. Make sure you review those, okay? How to prevent unethical behaviors. Again, managers must communicate to the organization. We're looking at different codes of ethics that the organization must have in place, the policies that they have that they want to enforce, And finally, we're looking at just to being ethically responsible. It's got to be taught amongst the employees. Again, I go through it once a year. I have to sit there for an hour and listen to ethical training and stuff like that, and then I sign off on it. I'm sure wherever you are and if you're working right now, I'm sure they do some sort of ethical training with you too. Discussions of ethics behaviors must include a decision-making process that they'll go through. Accountability definitely must be taken seriously at all times, at all levels of the organization. Must act fast. Again, there's that in a timely manner. You must act quickly. And then employees must know that they have to defend and maintain the company's reputation. Okay, that's why we do all this, right? It just takes one bad apple seed within the company to make the whole company look bad, right? So we really want to make sure that everyone's doing the right thing so we can keep the reputation at a good level. After all that, I'm going to test you guys now. I'm taking you through a process. I like to do this in class and kind of work you guys a little bit, but I'm still going to take you through the exercise. And while you're doing this, I want you to think a little bit like, what would you do in this scenario, okay? So here we have Mary, an ethical test, right? Don't read it. It's an eye chart. Don't hit pause or anything like that. I'm going to break it down for you, okay? So Mary basically works for a software company, okay? And ideally what's going on here is that she is a fantastic salesperson. She's so good that she's about $1,000 short for being $1 million salesperson for the year, okay? Now, she's being very motivated right now because if she gets that extra $1,000 within the next week before the end of the term, end of the year, and makes the $1 million, she'll then get a $10,000 bonus check. So she's very motivated right now. And if you go through the scenario, it says that she's trying to buy a townhouse or something like that. So she's really wanting the down payment. Okay, but she really wants that $10,000 bonus. She's only $1,000 short and she's 1 week away. Okay. She actually has a potential customer, but they're an inner city school. So like in DC or something like that, where a lot of inner city schools don't have any money. Okay. And I think, the scenario goes that she has some sort of, they're 2 students to a book and they don't have a lot of money. And the software that she's selling them will just be fantastic and help every student out. It's just a wonderful opportunity for everybody, right? But they don't have any money. So she's kind of going, how do I make this sale? How do I get to my $10,000 bonus? What do I do? Okay. So what she starts to think about doing is, what if I just write a check out of my personal account? I'll give it to the principal and say, hey, cash this check, and then write me a check back out of your account so I can capture it correctly, and then you'll buy the software. Okay, so that's kind of what she's thinking. She's going through the process. She's like, well, I could just write a check to them and have them just write me a check back. We'll just go ahead through that process. Okay, so the question I ask you is, who would write the check? That's where we have a lot of fun in class, right? There's probably a couple of you out there like, absolutely, man. I'd write 2 checks if I had to, okay? But the question is it ethical for Mary to actually write the check, okay? If you're still saying yes, then what I usually do is I walk you through the process and say, okay, let's say she does write the check, right? And the very next week, she goes in and they have what they call an all-hands meeting. That's where everybody comes in. It's a big banquet. The CEO is going to talk, the whole 9 yards. And let's say, if you're Mary, if you're the one out there saying, I would write the check, I'm going to pick on you right now, okay? But let's say you write the check, you make the $1 million, you make the $10,000 bonus, and at the all hands meeting, the president gets up there and says, let's talk about how great of a year we had, and let's honor our top salespeople. Mary, come on up. And they have one of those publisher clearinghouse checks, right? Those great big Magambo checks, and he comes up with the check. And he hands it to her and he says, congratulations, great job, shakes her hand. They do what they call the grip and grin, right? They shake hands and they smile, all that stuff. And Mary takes this check and sticks it underneath her arm and she walks back and she plants this check behind her chair and she sits down, right? And let's say Joe next to her is one of her colleagues. He's a salesperson too. He was $1,000 short too, and he didn't make it, right? So he obviously, human nature, he's going to lean over to her and say, how'd you do that? What did you do to make the $1 million? I know you were struggling there at the end. How did you make it happen? The question I ask you out there, right? Do you tell Joe what you did? Well, what I did was I wrote a check to the inner city school and they just cashed the check, put it in their account, and then they wrote me the check back. That's actually the definition of laundering money, by the way. So anyway, and most people out there, I know what you're thinking right now. I wouldn't tell them a thing. I'd just be quiet and say, it's none of your business, okay? But think about that for a second. Why? Because maybe it was unethical that we did, right? in the scenario, I keep spinning. I keep going deeper into the rabbit hole, right? Because then I say, well, Mary, whoever that is out there, whoever you are out there, right? I say, if you wrote the check, let's say you go to a party that night and your BFF is there, your best friend forever, right? The person you text all the time. I'm in class right now and Professor Edwards is going crazy and blah, 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 right? So the idea is that your BFF comes up and says, hey, did you get your check? Did you get your bonus? Because they knew you were struggling. You're like, oh, I did. Yeah, I got it. It's so great, right? And they ask you, they go, how'd you do it? Would you tell them? Of course you probably would, right? You'd probably tell your BFF, well, I wrote a check to them. They wrote it back to me and this and that. What I always throw in there, though, is the BFF just graduated from, one of the top-notch journalism schools, and they just got a job at the Washington Post, and they're starting to realize this is a great story. Acme software representatives write personal checks for personal gain. So they go to the editor and they say, hey, I got this story, and the editor's like, oh my God, that's fantastic. That's front page headlines, right? So they write it up, and it's on the front page, and of course, they always call the president right before they're going to go to publication, and at like 8:30 they're like going to print at 8:35, and they call them up and say, hey, we're doing an article on you. We're writing about how your salespeople write personal checks for personal gain. Got a comment? And of course they're all struggling. So the Acme president said kind of thing, right? Now you start thinking twice about, should I write the check, right? Hopefully you are. I'm still pointing at you out there, okay? The idea here is, though, let me spin it even further, right? So then let's say, do you think inner city principals talk to each other? Probably. They probably meet up for coffee and stuff like that. And then, so imagine two inner city principals meet up, and the one from Lincoln or wherever it was that got the software is just beaming because software was fantastic for the students, right? So the idea is that the other inner city principal is like, what are you so happy about, right? And he said, some software person came to me, wrote me a check for $1,000. I put it in the account. I wrote them back the $1,000, and I got this wonderful software from my students. What's that other inner city principal thinking? Well, what they're thinking is, can I get that person's card? So next thing you know, that other inner city principal is calling you up going, hey, I understand you got a deal going on where you write checks out of your personal account. And what are you going to say then? I'm pointing at you out there again, okay? What are you going to say? That was a one-time deal, right? That was a special deal. No. I mean, think about it. You're kind of getting yourself trapped, right? That's the idea behind an ethical situation, right? Is this thing going to come back and bite me in my fourth point of contact? Remember that little scenario? Okay. So the idea is that on the surface, it looks like a wonderful thing to do, right? But you really have to think about it. Is it really going to hurt me in the long run if I do something like that? Okay. What actually happened? Okay. What I usually say to you is that, what could you do instead of write the check? What could you do so that when I run that whole story again, you have no problem telling people what you did? Well, I often argue in class, and I'll argue with you here, is that the idea is you could, if you're such a good salesperson, could you not walk the streets of Washington, D.C. and go up to 5 different small businesses and ask them to donate $200 to the inner city school, show them what the software is going to be? It's a tax write-off for them. It's an expense to them. If you're that good of a salesperson, right? And then you come and say, don't make it out to me. Make it out to the inner city school. I'm going to go deliver it to them right now, right? And you show up with 5 checks for $200 a piece to the inner city principal and say, here, cash these, and then let's rock and roll. Is that a good thing? Sure. Could you host a car wash and show the software and then do a car wash over the weekend? You might have to work fast because you only got a week, but people dump money. People won't even get their car washed if they see it's for the inner city school. They'll just give money, put it in the boot or whatever it is. Okay. My point is, if you do something like that, fast forward, go through run the rabbit again, right? We're at the all hands meeting. You get your big check. You sit down behind your chair. Joe looks at you and go, how did you do that? Do you tell him? Well, what I did was I walked around for a freaking day, right? And I went up to 20 different businesses. And I finally got 5 to give me $200 for the inner city school. What's Joe thinking? Man, no wonder you're so darn good, right? So that's the idea behind it. You go to BFF and tell them what you did, and they want to write a story about it. You think when they called the president up at 8:30 at night, hey, I understand that your salespeople go the extra mile to walk around to raise money for an inner city, school. Got a comment? Yeah, make sure you know my last name. It's Edie. They're going to make sure they get it right. They're going to think that's fantastic publicity for them. Okay, and you get the idea. Now, if the inner city school contacts you, the other principal, and says, hey, I understand you did something for my buddy down the road. Can you do that for me? He's like, yeah, absolutely. You just got a new client. I can show you how you did a car wash, or yeah, I'm actually going to be in the area. Maybe I can go talk to a couple more businesses and try to raise some money for you so we can get you in there too. That's the idea behind it, okay? It's the same thing. You either write your check. Of course, you still might be arguing with me. Of course, I write the check. But the thing is that you're doing it for your benefit. You're not doing it for the business benefit or anything like that. So I really want you to kind of understand that. I always get one student go, what if I ask my friend to do it though? I'll have them write the check and I'll give them $2,000 back or something like that. I'll just whisper in their ear. Again, if it gets caught into the wind and people find out about it, are you going to be okay with that? Right? So you have to think about the scenario that you're in. All right. What actually happened in this scenario? She doesn't do it. She feels right. She actually went to her manager, I think, and the manager's like, you can't do that. Okay. So she didn't get her bonus the first year, and then she ends up getting it the second year and stuff like that. So I just want to go through that process. Again, there's a scenario though where you have to consider it, is that good or bad? Let's talk very quickly about corporate social responsibility now. Okay. So what is CSR, social responsibility? We're looking at the concern businesses have for the welfare of society. And we start looking at CSR is based on the commitment and integrity, okay, fairness and respect that the businesses have for the local community for the most part, right? We start looking at the proponents of CSR, argue that businesses owe their existence to the local community, to the societies, okay, for those that they serve. If they weren't there, we wouldn't be in business, right? So they try to give back to the local community. Now, there are good and bad things. I think on some of the case studies that you're going to do, you may see something about social responsibility in there, or you might see something that piques your interest about social responsibility. Sometimes there are scenarios where, out in LA, you see the big, smokestacks with fog billowing out. Back in the day, I think in the 80s or something like that, they were doing so much smog that the government stepped in and said, you need to put a filter on your smokestacks. And of course the business owners were like, no, we don't. We're here to make money, and that costs us a lot of money to do that. So the government came back in and said, you know what, that's cool, you don't have to do that. We're just going to fine you $1 million a day until you put a filter on your smokestack. So what do? They put a filter on their smokestack. What do they do next? They tell the local community around them how much they love them, and that, because of you, we're going to put filters on the smokestack. So we're doing social responsibility. So it can be kind of a double-edged sword on how you treat social responsibility. I'm a fan of give back to the community. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and it can be a really wonderful marketing tool as well. So something to think about. We just get into some terms now. We start talking about corporate philanthropy, charitable donations, things like that. We get into corporate social initiatives where we start to include and enhance the forms of the corporate philanthropy, right? We want to build an image of our company saying, hey, we do a lot of this. Again, it's a great PR tool, public relations tool to get people involved with us and say, hey, I really like those people because they do a lot for the local community. Some other terms we get into, we start talking about corporate responsibility, basically just including everything from, hire minorities, to making safe products. We want to make sure our products are safe. Minimizing pollution, like I talked about, using energy wisely. All of these things that are just in our policies saying we really want to be cognizant of what's going on around us, and we want to be corporate. We want to be responsible. We want to do the right thing. Okay. And then we have corporate policy. We may actually write policy that states our position, the firm is going to take on, social and political and all those different issues and stuff like that, how we're going to treat that as an organization. And then it leads us into the pyramid here. So we have the bottom of the pyramid is kind of what, the new entrepreneur, the new small business, the new companies out there. And, we're just trying to be profitable, right? This is the economic level. We're actually trying to be economic and obey the law and be legal and make sure our policies are in place and we're paying our taxes and all that good stuff, right? But as we grow, these all kind of meld together because we want to be ethical too. We want to do the right thing. We want to make sure our policies are in place. We make sure our employees understand what the organization is going to do as a whole. So we're trying to meld these in here. But when we start to make money and really do well, that's when we start to kind of hit the top of the pyramid, right? This is where we get into being a good citizen. We get into philanthropy and things like that, giving back. I will tell you, as an organization such as myself, I've done things many times for the Wounded Warrior Foundation, right? I've given money to them. I've done it in honor of my clients and stuff like that because it's just a nice marketing tool, and I just like to give back to the Wounded Warriors. So there's things out there that you can do. But again, am I being philanthropy? No, I just do it because, I'm a former Army guy and I just like doing that kind of stuff. But again, if you want to be a big time philanthropy or large organizations, they do a lot of stuff like that, and it's fantastic. So I like for you to understand this pyramid. It's really good to understand. We start to get in a little bit of fluff here. I'm not obviously going to test you on this stuff, okay? But who are the most generous celebrities out there? Well, look at Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car, okay? So she's done like over $50 million in just donations to charities and stuff like that. And there's different people up here. Brangelina, they're not together anymore, but they've done over $8 million. Michael Jordan's done $5 million, so on and so forth. Pretty interesting. We get to who cares, who gives the most. This is pretty interesting because California gives the most percentage-wise when it comes to contributing and donations. I find that odd because California is usually broke, right? They're having a hard time kind of generating revenue and stuff, but it's probably because a lot of the Hollywoods and all that stuff, all the celebrities live out in California, so maybe that's why it's coming from there. New Jersey's second. That's interesting too. So who gives the most? And then we start to get into more fluff, but here's what's interesting. Generous Americans, right? Americans donated, almost $300 billion or something like that, $300 million, something like that in 2018. What's interesting about that is incomes under $100,000 give the most money. Imagine that, right? People making over $100,000, they don't give as much money. It's like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? Well, I guess we're just all generous anyway, okay? And then we look at society as the environment. Over 1/3 of working Americans receive their salaries from nonprofits. I mentioned that in a previous VLR where they're really not in it for the profit. They're looking for grants and loans and things like that. And their ideas are to provide opportunities to others. That's their satisfy the need portion of their business. So, over 1/3 of working Americans are from nonprofits. Very interesting, okay? And obviously, we've talked a little bit about the green movement, right? We're hugging our trees and all that stuff. So the green movement emerged as concerns about the global warming, okay? And there's many opportunities going on in that movement. Many companies are trying to minimize their carbon footprint because of the global warming. The amount of carbon released during items production, distribution, consumption, disposal. They're trying to put policies in place within the organization that shows them that they're being a little bit more corporate responsible and a little more social responsible, okay? All good things. Leads us into responsibility to the environment. Environmental efforts that increase the cost can offer good opportunities. Again, we're looking at renewable energy. Industries account for almost 8.5 million U.S. jobs. So renewable energy is out there these days. And they say by 2030, as many as 40 million green jobs, right? So if you're green, you're into that, save the planet, global warming stuff. I mean, there's opportunities out there for you guys that are coming, okay? So they're just going to get more and more and more as we start to head towards 2030. So we got about 10 more years of this, okay? And we start to get into some terms now. We're just looking at, what's a social audit? We're looking at the systematic evaluation of the organization's progress towards implementing these programs, right? And then there's 4 types of social audits with the watchdogs, the environmentalists, they're always watching, right? They want to see what you do. I can give you one example, for instance, in the construction world. My father was construction for about 40 years. If during the construction site, and this happens till today, if some sort of chemical or oil or something like that is spilled on the ground, OSHA has to come in. They have to bring an organization to make sure that the soil doesn't get disrupted and goes into the water, so the water and all that stuff. So it becomes a really big deal when they do stuff like that. Your unions, again, they're going to watch out for these kind of things. And then just the customers are going to be interested, okay? The more, I find the more social responsibility that you provide, the better your customer base, because they're going to be like, hey, I like that, all right? And then last but not least, I do want to show this to you. I believe I give this to you as a PDF, so I definitely want you to download this and put it in your kit bag. You may see it again. You may see it again, okay? So this is the 6 basic rights to the consumer that was brought to us by President Kennedy back into the 60s. Really interesting stuff here because there are 6 consumer rights that you should be aware of. One is you have a right to safety. Believe that. Isn't that interesting, okay? Products consumers purchase must be safe for their intended use, must include explicit directions and proper use. Now, what's really interesting about this is that they actually had to come out with something to say you have a right to safety. So that means before that, Americans probably were just buying products they didn't know if it was safe or not, okay? So they had to come out with something to say, hey, consumers have a right to safety, okay? You have a right to be informed, okay? Consumers must have access to complete information about the product before they buy it. Of course, in today's society, you can go look up anything and know the information on the products that you have. But at some point, that probably wasn't the case. They had to come up with this, okay? I really want you to understand this. You have a right to choose. Consumers must have a choice of products. So there's some competition in place, okay, offered by different manufacturers to satisfy a need. You have a right to be heard. Okay, this is pretty interesting. Someone must be available who will listen and take appropriate action when a customer complains. Okay, notice it doesn't say you have a right to complain. You have a right to be heard, though. Okay, so you have a right to be heard, not a right to complain. You have a right to be heard, though. Okay, you have a right to consumer education to learn more about what's going on out there. And then, last but not least, but believe it or not, you have a right to courteous service. So now you have a right to be heard, but you have a right. The consumers are entitled to convenience, courtesy, responsiveness, okay, by the manufacturers and the sellers. Okay, so you have a right to courteous service. So if you ever get online with somebody and they're kind of rude to you, they're really not supposed to be. You have a right to courteous service. So I want you to understand the 6 basic rights. Again, you may see them again. Cool? All right. And that is it. We've made it through VLR-4 now, and I will see you on the next one.